Okay, how you guys doing today? Awesome to see you. Happy Earth Day, if you guys weren't aware of that. So if you have not done something for your environment, my challenge to you is before this day is out, do something for your environment. As simple as taking a plastic bottle and throwing it in a recycle bin, that counts. Or maybe go volunteer at an awesome place like Tortoise Group. Okay, so welcome. This is our first general meeting of the year. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't talk in a microphone because I know my voice can carry, but we are recording this for posterity, so it's pretty cool. Today we're going to talk about ticks. We have a parasitologist that will be speaking a little bit later, Miss Molly Bechtel. Thank you, Molly, for joining us. Sarah's going to talk about tortoises in general. I want to give you guys a quick, brief update of where the organization is, and then I'll get off the microphone. We had our Burros for Besties campaign, and we raised almost $13,000. And I know some of you guys here donated. Thank you. Georgie, I know you did. Mary, I know you did. We had several folks donate, and that money is going directly to putting tortoises into new homes. And it's a pretty simple process. Most of you guys here are aware of how it works. And the crazy thing is the reason we're able to do so many adoptions is because we rely on volunteer help. Me and Sarah and Amanda can't do all this work, and we rely on folks like you guys to help out. And I want to say thank you for each one of you that volunteers. Rosemary, I know that you volunteer. Georgie, you obviously volunteer. You guys, everybody here, I thank you guys for helping out. So what else was I going to talk about? Registration. Okay, so real quickly, I know I talked about this in last year, but this year we're doing a tortoise census. First ever in the history of the universe, at least in the world. I don't know about the universe, but assuming there are no desert tortoises floating around on Neptune or something. What we're doing is we are going to attempt to scientifically estimate how many pet tortoises there are in Clark County. Now, why is this number important? How many of you guys have tortoises as pets? So legally, under federal law and Nevada state law, you can have a tortoise as a pet as long as you register, and those of you that are here know all of that, right? The crazy thing about this animal is that the state of Nevada, and particularly Clark County, do not recognize a desert tortoise as a pet. Now, there's a whole bunch of funding issues, and I won't get into any crazy conspiracy theory, but the simple fact is that because the scientific community doesn't know how many pets there are, no further steps can be taken. And the further steps equate to funding on some level. It will help us to put more tortoises into homes and ultimately keep pet tortoises out of the desert. Is there anybody here that doesn't know why we don't want to put a pet tortoise into the desert? Do you not know, Cheryl? I thought you knew. Yes, I asked if you don't know. You know, I know you know. Yeah, so the main reason is URTD, and I know most of you are familiar with that, but I want to hammer it home. We want to make sure, and I bring this up all the time because I want you guys as ambassadors to let your friends and family know. If you know somebody that has a tortoise, we all know somebody somewhere has a whole bunch of tortoises in their backyard. Good-natured people think they're helping the environment by breeding tortoises, and they take tortoises and put them out into the wild. That is the wrong thing to do. But we're not going to be tortoise Nazis, right? We don't need to yell at people. We don't need to say you're a bad person. All we need to do is say, this is why it's wrong. Registration is important in the bigger picture because that is going to help the tortoise census. In 2 months, we're going to send out a mailer to roughly 50,000 households in Clark County. And you guys might receive something that says Tortoise Group. If you do, please fill it out and send it back in. We are going to take that information, UNLV is going to compile that with our existing registration data, and come up with a viable estimate of how many tortoises are in Clark County. Once we have this number, I can take this to the scientific community and say, hey, we need to be taken seriously in terms of funding. This is not an issue that's going away, and we need help from the various government agencies. So that is my intent behind the census, but also it's pretty cool. We're doing a benchmark thing that has never been done before, and there's a whole bunch of organizations in California that are interested in what we're doing. And so the bottom line there, if you have not registered your tortoise, please do so. You can do so for free, it doesn't cost any money. If you're wary of putting your personal information down anywhere, you can register anonymously. You can do that on our website. All you need to do is two things, your zip code and the number of tortoises you have. And then our system will generate a code. It's like 12 digits long. And that code, you gotta write down because once you get off the web page, that code disappears. But we keep it. So that way, if NDOW, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, any agency ever came to you and said, Georgie, we're gonna take your tortoises, you could say, no, here is A469395, whatever the code is, and then Tortoise Group can then say, I verify this, Georgie registered on 4/21/2018. I don't know that it's Georgie. I don't have any information. All I have is this code that you guys can keep. So it's pretty cool. So you can anonymously register. We would recommend that you register normally, and that is only because I'm a data freak myself, but I don't share it with Tortoise Group. We'll never share your data with any other organization. The only thing that we will share is information about your tortoise. And any health issues or anything like that, we are obligated to share with various agencies. And I think that does help the scientific community as a whole anyway. Does anybody have any questions about the registration or what we're doing? Yes, ma'am.
So you'll have a 50,000 sample, then you multiply it up to 2 million people?
Great question. So what Georgia asked is we got a 50,000 sample that I'm sending out, and then we can X factor it up to 2.1 million. It's a lot more complicated and difficult than that. Realistically, with a direct mailer, I expect a response rate of less than 1%. So we're probably only going to get about 200 or 300 responses. But and I've vetted all of this with 14 different biologists in the tortoise community and with the UNLV CBER, and I don't know what that stands for, the Center for Business, Economic, and Resource or something like that. But they're statisticians. They know how to do this stuff and they do it professionally. And what they told me was you need about 150 responses. The 150 responses plus the data that we have, plus known tortoise reproductive rates, will then be able to set the stage for something. Now, it's going to look a little different than like a dog and a cat survey, because if you actually look at how those surveys are done, they're very non-scientific. I wanted to make this as scientific as possible so that it's not going to be unassailable. It's an estimate at the end of the day, but it's still data driven. So that's a good question, but there's a lot of little coefficients to things in there that.
Could we hand out forms like that to people who come to like that?
I would love that, because then that would help our response rate, but I want it to be fair. So, yeah. I want to so bad. Trust me, I would love to. I'd hand you guys a form and say, hey, fill this out and send it in. But if you receive one, then you got one legitimately. So if you do receive one, please fill it out and then send it back. Postage is free of charge, so everything's cool with that.
So it's a random mailing?
It's a random mailing, yep. I took the 50, I think there's 78 zip codes within Clark County, and of those, there's about 20 that are like on the Strip and downtown non-residential areas. So what we're focusing on is residential areas that have single-family units. We're not going into apartment complexes or anything like that, so.
Is this going to be publicized?
Yes, and in fact, what I'm doing right now, if you listen, we've got ads on 94.1. There's an AM station, I don't remember the number. We got TV ads on Telemundo because we're reaching out to the Spanish-speaking population. 30% of the valley speak Spanish. We definitely want to include these folks. I've got billboards. So yes, there's a big public push, and the push is register your tortoise. The billboard's pretty cool. It just says like help tortoises register yours. You know, real simple messaging. But we're getting responses already. And then in about 2 months, then I'm gonna hit the news media. and basically try to get as many interviews as possible. So yes, we're making a very big public push for this. Yes, ma'am.
I know someone who has desert tortoise, and they were asking me a question, and I was recommending that they contact this group. And he doesn't want to because he doesn't have an official burrow. He doesn't have this, and he's afraid somebody's going to come and take his tortoises away.
Yes. Yes. Okay, so if you guys didn't hear that, Rosemary has a friend that has tortoises, but the burrow isn't built up to spec, right? And is afraid of something negative happening. I will say this again, we are not the tortoise Nazis. Our intent, above all the registration, funding, all that other nonsense, we want to make sure that anybody that has a tortoise within the state of Nevada knows how to take care of this animal properly. That is the bottom line behind everything. So, your friend that has a tortoise, what I would recommend is saying, look, these guys are crazy, they do their own little thing, we're good, bad, and different, doesn't really matter, but you don't have to worry about any negative ramification. And I'll tell you guys a little secret, there's no enforcement agency. End out, because they have to, there's no way to enforce taking tortoises. So it's not gonna happen.
We don't have the room anyway.
Right, they don't know, there's nowhere to put them. We are the agency that the government puts the tortoises in, so.
Behind hills and random places.
Yeah.
Waiting for somebody to come get it.
Right. So having said that, being lawful and legal about it, in that specific case, I would recommend this person to just register their tortoises anonymously. If nothing else, if your friend would like information, Sarah or I would be more than happy to offer information. That's it. There's no compunction. There's no type of effort on our part to get people to what we think is right. We're going to offer the information, and that's it. And that includes legal activity too. So as long as a tortoise is registered, boom, he's legal. End of story.
Just invite him to the meeting.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yes. Cheryl's question was, are we going to use the information from the microchipping clinics and the sterilization clinics? Yes. Yes, absolutely, because that is excellent data on the health of each one of your tortoises. So all of that data, and if you guys have been to any of our recent clinics, we ask for the household ID, which is your first and last initial and the last four of your phone number, for exactly the same reason. When I turn this data over to U.S. Fish and Wildlife and USGS, it keeps you guys anonymous as tortoise custodians. So I can't hammer that point home far enough. Your data is secure, and we're not sharing it with anybody. And even if that were an issue, the anonymous registration then poses an alternative to that too. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
So anyone who is tourist can just contact you guys for do you do a free microchipping?
Yeah, microchip. Yeah, we offer the microchips for free. So, but the times that we do offer the microchips for free are at the clinics. So we're going to do 3 more clinics throughout the year. And what we're going to do this year is split the valley into quadrants. We just had one on the southwest side of town on April 8th, and that was at Petco on Warm Springs in Durango. The next one that we're going to do is Jones Feed and Supply on, what is that, Rancho and Lone Mountain, right across from Santa Fe Station. So that'll be the northwest side of town. I'm going to do one over on the east side of town, probably, I'm looking at the Petco that's on like Nellis and Charleston area, but somewhere up near Nellis, and then we're going to do one down in Henderson too. And that is when we can give out the free microchips, yeah.
It's not just anytime we're a member or someone will just call you guys and do a tortoise feed.
We put microchips when we adopt. Yeah, so when we adopt a tortoise, we're putting a microchip in right there. But if somebody has a tortoise that wants a microchip, you can come to one of our clinics. Yep. Yep. Any other questions? Cool. I'll shut up. Sarah?
Thank you, Kobe. My name is Sarah Mortimer. I'm sure a lot of you recognize me, and I recognize a lot of you, so thank you for coming. I'm just going to briefly go over spring behavior with desert tortoises and our current and upcoming events. So, spring behavior, how many of your tortoises have come out of their burrows and come out of brumation? Anyone's tortoise hasn't yet? You have a couple that are still down? Okay, good.
My big one and the spruce one are both still in.
All right, yeah, so I do have a couple of worried custodians that I've gotten phone calls from that say that their tortoise haven't come out yet. These are deeper burrows, remain cooler, constant temperature. It's not uncommon for tortoises to sleep until May. I know that it gives you a lot of anxiety when you hear your friends' tortoises are coming out, but your tortoise knows what they're doing. So we have seen a lot of our tortoises come out at the habitat, and typically they're going to be basking before browsing. So a lot of times our tortoises aren't eating right away. They can go without food for quite some time, so don't panic if your tortoise hasn't eaten in a couple weeks. Typically the proper temperature for them to be digesting is about 80 degrees, so what they typically will do is come out, bask in the sun, and then they'll start to browse, and that's when you'd want to offer food. Some tortoises will start eating right away, and we do have some little piggies out at the habitat. So just as I mentioned, some tortoises will eat right away, and this time of year we also do see tortoises spending a lot of time in their burrow. Sometimes they grace you with their presence, and that was just a fake out, and they return to their burrow and stay back down. Or sometimes they will even sleep outside this time of year, and that's not uncommon either for them to not use their burrow. They do whatever is most comfortable for them. So if it's really nice out at night, maybe they'll go camping in a corner of your backyard. So as I mentioned, most have appeared, but some are still down, and some of you even mentioned, some of your tortoises are still down. I think we have one or two at the habitat that still haven't made an appearance, so probably the beginning of May we'll dig those guys up and see what's going on. It's normally just, what are you guys doing and why are you digging me up? So when your tortoise first comes out and is walking around, you want to go ahead and give them a nice soaking and make sure that they have a purge of water so that they can release their urates. Here we have a nice passing of urates, and that's important for them to be cycling through their systems. We have recently been discussing bladder stones and what factors go into that, and Dr. Jay Johnson with Arizona Exotic Pet Veterinary Clinic has suggested overwatering being an issue. Supplying a constant supply of water, your tortoises are drinking more frequently in small amounts instead of doing this purge where they fill their systems up and flush out their systems. And that's really important for them to rid themselves of the urates. So if they're taking little bits of water all the time, then they're less likely to release those small and medium chunks of urates. So if you are supplying your tortoise with a constant form of water, then you might want to pull back a little bit and just let them rely on maybe just every couple weeks go ahead and water them rather than supplying a constant source of water. So as soon as your tortoise comes out, you'll be giving it your own little external examination, taking a look specifically at the nares, the nose, checking for any discharge or wetness, and taking a look at their eyes specifically, checking for puffiness or redness or swelling. And if you see any of those are indicators of clinical illness, and you probably should be taking your tortoise to the vet. Now, sometimes tortoises' faces get wet from eating or drinking, so not always a concern. Sometimes dust does get in their eyes and different things like that. If you think that it's just dust and dirt, rinse off your tortoise and keep an eye on it once it does dry off. But if it is persistent or if it's boogers, mucus coming out of there, then that's definitely an indicator that your tortoise needs a trip to the vet. And today we're talking about soft ticks. You can find soft ticks on your tortoise sometimes, and sometimes they're very difficult to see. This one, obviously not, it's kind of gross. But here, there's a bunch of ticks, a cluster of ticks underneath. Typically, ticks will hang out in the seams of scutes. So the live tissue of where your tortoise is growing is typically where you'll find them, but you can still find them on their skin and limbs occasionally. So the first adoption of the season actually happened in February because we had that warm spell, and Barney was one of our first tortoises to wake up. He's no longer named Barney. But he was adopted out in February because he had a couple ticks on him, so we had to get him out of that pen, get the ticks off of him, and he went to his new home. So far, we've performed 15 adoptions, and Charles and his family just adopted a tortoise this year. Congratulations. And we had our first health assessment and microchipping clinic, as Kobe mentioned. And I just want to thank all the volunteers that came out and helped with that event. We cannot be successful without having volunteers come out to that event and help us work that. We have biologists come out, we have volunteers come out. You guys are awesome, and we can't do events like this without you. We screened over 50 tortoises at this clinic, so that's awesome. And you guys deserve a little round of applause. So tomorrow, we're actually doing our second tortoise meet and greet out at Lone Mountain Regional Park, where we bring adoptable tortoises out for people to see, to get to interact with tortoises, and if they're looking to adopt, then they can actually pick out their tortoise. It's kind of a fun little event, and I think it's supposed to be really nice tomorrow, so if you have time, come out and stop by. May 5th, we are going to be participating in the Science and Technology Expo, as well as Petapalooza. I'll be putting out an email blast and trying to recruit some volunteers, so if that's something you want to hop on board and help out with, I'd love to have you. Oh, I don't know about that. And happy hour is going to be May 8th, Tuesday. We're going to be at Gordon Biersch. Please come join us. It's going to be a lot of fun, and we'll talk about tortoises and hang out. And then now, I'm going to hand it over to Molly Bechtel. Molly graduated from the University of Nevada, Reno with a Bachelor's of Science and Master's of Science in Animal Science. That's a little hard to say. While working on her master's at UNR, Molly published work on parasite abundance and diversity in wood rats, which further piqued her interest in disease ecology and how it applies to wildlife ecology. Soon after Molly completed her master's degree, she started work in the herpetology lab at UNR, helping collect tissue samples of desert tortoises to assess disease. Eventually, she was hired at the USGS as a desert tortoise biologist. Here, she worked on several research projects, including projects focused on disease and several research and health of tortoise populations. Currently, she is studying tick-borne disease in desert tortoises and how ticks and disease interact with the Mojave Desert burrow ecosystem and possibly public health. In her free time, she founded and volunteers with the Northern Arizona Association for Women in STEM, which advocates for equal representation of women in the sciences. I'm going to pass it over to Molly. Thank you.
Okay. I am really excited to be here today to talk to you guys about some of my research and ticks and tick-borne pathogens of the Mojave Desert tortoise. Is there a clicker? Okay. All right. But before I get started on talking about ticks, I wanted to give you guys a little background on wildlife and disease. So disease outbreaks in wildlife can cause reduced fitness in wildlife populations as well as mortality. An example of this is a huge outbreak of rinderpest that happened in Africa in the late 19th century and just devastated African wildlife, but also affected livestock. So these outbreaks can affect people just as much as they affect wildlife. Maybe a more familiar example of wildlife disease outbreaks is chytrid fungus, which has been attributed to about 30% of amphibian extinctions worldwide. And our desert tortoises aren't immune to these outbreaks either. If you're not familiar with mycoplasma, which is the causative agent of upper respiratory tract disease, although there's a lot of debate on how it's transmitted between tortoises and how it affects their systems, it's still attributed to causing population declines throughout the Mojave. And you can see this guy has contracted upper respiratory tract disease. He has this mucousy discharge and some swollen eyes and just doesn't look like he's in good shape. Poor guy. Also, ticks are a vector of disease and can spread disease and also make these outbreaks worse in some ways, depending on how they're spread. So in Europe, this Ixodes tick right here helps spread Anaplasma phagocytophilum, which can also manifest clinical signs, not just in people, but in wildlife and even pets. Lyme disease, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, is the biggest tick-borne disease that we have to deal with here in the United States, and it's common up in Northern California. And what happens is that a tick carrying Borrelia burgdorferi, which is the bacteria that causes Lyme disease, will go and bite a person, and this person will come up with these bullseye rash and then have to go on antibiotics, hopefully if they catch it. And as I mentioned, we don't have to worry about Borrelia burgdorferi here in the Southwest, but we do have ticks that carry a species of Borrelia that causes illness in humans. So we have these ornithodorus, these soft ticks right here. And they carry a Borrelia that causes tick-borne relapsing fever in people. And what happens with tick-borne relapsing fever is generally it's not an issue if you get it taken care of right away. But after about 7 days, after you've been bit by a tick, you'll start to have really high fever, headaches, body aches, symptoms that are very similar to a flu. And then those symptoms after 3 days go away and you feel fine. But then they come back and last for another 3 days, and that cycle continues unless you get treated with antibiotics. As I mentioned, generally it's you can take care of tick-borne relapsing fever very easily just with antibiotics. But if it goes untreated, it can cause more severe issues like neuropathy, and it does cause abortion in pregnant women. So let's talk more about these ticks. Before I go any further, I want to clarify that there's 3 species of ornithodorus, of soft ticks, in the Southwest that we find here in our own backyard. And these 3 species all carry a Borrelia-specific pathogen. So what I mean by that is that Ornithodorus turricata carries Borrelia turricata, Ornithodorus parkeri carries Borrelia parkeri, and Ornithodorus hermsii carries Borrelia hermsii. Despite the fact that there's 3 different species that are specific to their tick, they all cause TBRF in people. So we have 3 different species of ticks that overlap with desert tortoise habitat and occur throughout the Mojave, and they all can cause tick-borne relapsing fever. Distributions have been attempted for Ornithodorus turricata and Ornithodorus hermsii. No distributions have really been studied for parkeri, although we do know that they occur here and they like to be in tortoise burrows. But even the distribution maps that have been done for hermsii and turricata, they haven't included the Mojave. People tend to just glaze over that area of the country. Next slide. So regardless, they still occur here. We know that. They are nidicolous, which I'll talk about what that means in a second, and also opportunistic. So there are ticks that are specialists, meaning that they will just feed on one species of animal. But these guys, they don't care if you're a tortoise, if you're a bird, if you're a person. If you have blood, they will be more than happy to take a meal from you. And they're carriers of the causative agent of TBRF. It was discovered in the early 80s that 2 of the 3 species that occur in the Mojave, Ornithodorus parkeri and Ornithodorus turricata, are common ectoparasites of desert tortoises. However, since that work has been done in the 80s, there really hasn't been any work at all done about how these ticks interact with desert tortoises, despite the fact that they nest in their burrows. nothing has really been done since Green's work in the 80s. Green also noted that they were very difficult to identify. So this supposedly is 2 different species of ticks here. And the way that you identify them is that you count these little bumps, these tiny little bumps, not these invaginations. Those don't mean anything as far as identifying a tick, but these tiny little bumps. And Parker eye has about 18 mammallae, that's what those bumps are called, or mammallae, per 1 millimeter, while Turricato only has 10. And literature since Green's work has actually argued that that's such a subjective measure to determine these ticks that perhaps Green didn't even identify them accurately, because they are very difficult. And you can imagine staring at a microscope and counting these tiny little bumps. You can miscount, overcount, things like that, depending on who the technician is. Okay, so I mentioned these ticks are nidicolous, so I'll be able to explain this better. Yeah?
I guess I had a misconception that ticks needed like forest trees and greenery around to be around. Now you say in the desert they're all over there, so they can be anywhere in our yards or plants and so.
They could be, yeah.
Is it normal for them to get into a populated area, like say our backyard?
Yes. They like to be in dark places, which is what nidicolous means, that they like to be in a nest, and they tend to stay in that nest their entire life. So if you have an area like that in your yard, it's very possible that a squirrel, for example, could bring an adult tick into that area. The tick falls off and lays eggs. And then those ticks will stay in that area. Because one of the characteristics of being nidicolous is that unless a host takes you somewhere, you don't leave the place that you hatched. Because it's dark, it's comfortable, rodents or hosts, tortoises will come in and out, so you have something to eat. Right. So in that respect, it is very possible that you could have ticks in your backyard.
Now, in that photo you showed of the ticks, there was like a large group of them. Do they have to be in a large group to actually see them? If there was one on the tortoise, like after I saw the invite for this meeting about it's going to be about the parasites, I really checked my tortoise this morning, and I couldn't see anything on the shell, legs, anywhere else. Should I be able to see it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. They can be very tiny.
If I'm looking for them, you should be able to find them.
Yes. Yeah, I would say so. Yep. So when they first hatch, they hatch into their larval stage. So the difference between larvae and nymphs and adults is that they only have 3 legs on each side of their body. They're also very small. So you can imagine they would be very difficult to identify at that stage, at least this species. Then they'll find a host, they'll take a meal, they'll fall off that host, and they'll molt into what's called a nymph. And oftentimes there's several nymphal molts, so they'll molt again and again, just into larger nymphs, until finally they'll get their last feed before they molt into an adult. And an adult is going to feed off of a host and then fall off that host and lay their eggs, usually in the same place where they were hatched. Okay. So this brings me to my research question, more or less. I keep mentioning that very little is known about these ticks and how they interact with these tortoises and possibly even public health. We don't know if the Borrelia that they carry is pathogenic to tortoises. We don't know if it's not. But we do know that they carry a harmful disease to people and that they like to lay their eggs and basically grow up in tortoise burrows. So I'm going to answer this question first by identifying ticks found in desert tortoise in the Mojave Desert. And I'm going to do this not by just collecting ticks directly off of tortoises or opportunistically found on the desert floor, which can happen occasionally. But I'm also going to do a surveillance method using dry ice and also a vacuum. So dry ice trap is basically tries to mimic a possible host. So the dry ice will sublimate into CO2, and then those ticks are attracted to that carbon dioxide because they think it's a living, breathing thing. And how you do this with a tortoise burrow is that you'll stuff like a cooler or a Tupperware full of dry ice, like here, and you insert a tube, and then hopefully that tube allows dry ice to sublimate into the burrow, and then ticks will crawl up into the tube and get stuck. This has been done successfully in the Mojave and also with gopher tortoise burrows. But more recent research seems to think that if you want to study ticks in a burrow, that using a vacuum is the way to go, particularly in the Mojave because it gets really hot. And oftentimes that dry ice sublimates before it even has a chance to travel down that tube into the tortoise burrow.
And here by vacuum, you mean the home appliance?
Yep. I'm also looking to determine the pathogen prevalence in these ticks. So how many of these ticks actually do carry Borrelia? What is the prevalence? Further, how do they interact with desert tortoises? And I've been doing this by doing a qPCR, quantitative polymerase chain reaction, molecular method that amplifies DNA that I'm looking for. So in this case, it would be Borrelia. And then sequencing it using an IGS gene, which is diagnostic. So far, I have identified 223 ticks microscopically. 64% of these ticks are Ornithodorus parkeri. All of these ticks were either collected from tortoise burrows or directly off of tortoises. This actually corresponds with the literature that is out there, that researchers tend to think that most of the ticks that we find on desert tortoises are Ornithodorus parkeri. The rest, the 18%, are Ornithodorus terracota, and 18% have not been able to be identified because they're too small to actually count the bumps on their back. So here I have that same data distributed into different life stages. And if you notice, these really tiny larvae and nymphs are all of my unknowns just because they're too tiny to see under a microscope. Okay, so I've taken a subset of those 223 ticks. I have a sample number of 170 ticks that were all collected directly off of tortoises, so not just in burrows. They were attached to a tortoise. And I've tested them for Borrelia, and 0 have actually come up positive. However, I do have a human blood sample that I tested for Borrelia. So this tortoise tech was working out in the desert with some wild tortoises and had her arm in a desert tortoise burrow, as you do, and she got bit by a tick. And a few days later, she came down with high fever, headache, the whole bit. And so we drew her blood and we sequenced it, and sure enough, she had Borrelia terracota, which means she was probably bitten by an Ornithodorus terracota in that same habitat where she was working. Okay. I've also started looking at USGS health assessment data. Yeah.
When she reached in, the tick bit her and then jumped off.
I didn't get the whole story, but I never got the tick. I never saw the tick, so it sounds like it did just bite her and then she like flipped it off or something
Don't
like
they
that.
traditionally, when they bite, they actually are sticking into you and then bite and you see them late, at some point?
Oh, that can happen, but not always, especially with these Ornithodorus species. They're not like the kinds that you see in Northern California or back east that will stay on you and blow. Yeah, they'll take a taste and like go back into the dark. They really like being in dark spaces, so sometimes even if there is a possible blood meal, they'll just ignore it because they're comfortable in their tiny little
I
burrow.
guess, and they go, "Oh, I'm staying."
Yeah, yeah, yes.
You don't even know
Somebody
that.
asked a question to you, Katie, because we're recording.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. So I've been looking at these health assessment data sheets, and I found that over the time period of 10 years, about 8,000 ticks have been observed on tortoises. This is definitely an estimate because the USGS health assessment data sheets don't have a section for you to put the exact number of tick you see on a desert tortoise, and nor do we collect them. So what we have instead on these data sheets are just ranges of numbers. So if you see 2 ticks on a desert tortoise, you would circle 1 to 5, brush them off, et cetera. And then if there's greater than 10, you're just greater than 10, although I did have a couple of observations that had greater than 20 and greater than 50 circled, which was really interesting, kind of written in there. But anyway, so I came up with this estimate by taking the median number of each range. So 1 to 5, I used 3, 6 to 10, I used 8, and greater than 10, or greater than anything, I just used that number. So for greater than 10, I used the number 10, greater than 20, I used 20. And I came up with this estimate. So I should note that about close to 7,000 of these ticks were found at the previous Desert Tortoise Conservation Center, now owned by the Great Basin Institute, which makes sense because these tortoises are often just sampled more, so you have more of an opportunity to find ticks. I think at one point the USGS was doing health assessments on them monthly, as opposed to the guys out in the wild, which get its health assessments seasonally. At the most. So despite this fact, I still have found 500 ticks were noted to be found at the study site at Coyote Springs, which is interesting because this is the same area where that person got bit by that tick and contracted tick-borne relapsing fever. Okay, next. So depending on where you live in the West, what we know about tick-borne relapsing fever anyway is that the prevalency is higher in some places than others. The CDC reports that about 33% of all tick-borne relapsing fever cases come from California, while only 4% come from Nevada. And these reported cases are represented by those dots. But if you notice, so Coyote Springs, where that woman got bit, is kind of like up here, a couple hours north of Las Vegas, and there's no blue dot there. Which to me suggests that perhaps all these cases aren't being reported. People aren't aware that when they get sick, they have this high fever and it goes away and it comes back, they go to the doctor, they just get antibiotics, it's taken care of. They don't know it's tick-borne relapsing fever. But also, I think that people just don't spend their free time in Las Vegas sticking their hands in tortoise burrows. So I think the prevalence is probably higher. We just don't know because we don't collect ticks and test them for tick-borne relapsing fever. Okay. So a lot of research, there has not been any research really done on desert tortoises and tick-borne pathogens at all. But I did want to draw your attention to the study done in leopard tortoises, so this guy, that guy right there, by Burridge et al. In 2000. So she was looking at these ticks brought over on leopard tortoises to Florida via the pet trade. So there's two species of ticks that came over to Florida on these tortoises. And one was Amblyomma marmorium, which is this guy right here, and this is a specialist tick. This tick will only feed on leopard tortoises. And she also tested Amblyomma sparsum, which this guy is a generalist. So he'll take blood from tortoise or bird or whatever. If it's hungry, he doesn't care. And what she was testing these ticks for was this pathogen called Cowdria ruminantium. This causes a disease called heart water disease in ruminants, and it's highly pathogenic to these guys. So basically, it just causes their heart to stop, and within minutes after being bit from a tick, a deer, for example, or a goat will just die. And unfortunately, that's just how it is. So she was testing both of these species for this pathogen. And what she found was that about half of the Amblyomma sparsum, the generalist ticks, were positive for Cowdria ruminantium, which is kind of disconcerting to think that this pathogen is being brought into the United States. But she also found that 0 of the almost 200 ticks that she tested of the Amblyomma marmorium were positive for that disease. So the specialist didn't test positive at all for Cowdria ruminantium, which is kind of interesting because in Africa and Madagascar area where you find these tortoises, usually even in the Amblyomma marmorium, there's about 10% prevalence of this pathogen. So this leads me to think that there is possibly a factor in tortoise blood that is interacting with the pathogens that these ticks carry. In fact, there are animals where this very fact has been established. Blue belly lizards, which we have around here, but they're also in Northern California where Lyme disease exists. And they have been found to have what's called a borreliocidal factor in their blood. And what that means is that this enzyme, this protein in their blood, once it comes into contact with these Borrelia spirochetes, so in a tick gut, for instance, it kills it. It's just, so this is actually really cool because where you see more of these lizards in Northern California, a higher abundance of these lizards, you see less prevalence of Lyme disease. Because when a tick that's carrying Borrelia burgdorferi the causative agents of Lyme disease, comes and bites one of these lizards. You can see this guy has a group of ticks he's carrying around with him. The enzyme in their blood will kill the pathogen. So then that tick will drop off of the lizard, go find a human to bite, and it's incapable of transmitting Lyme disease to that person because the blood in the blue belly killed the Borrelia burgdorferi. So it's really cool. And what's really interesting is that this enzyme is related to what's known as a thermolabile protein, which is also found in tortoises. But despite the fact that desert tortoises are commonly parasitized by ticks that carry a harmful pathogen to people, no research on the resistance or susceptibility in desert tortoises in relation to these ticks and the pathogen they carry has been done. So we don't even know if this could make them sick, but we also don't know if perhaps they're killing the pathogen that these ticks carry. So for future research, go ahead, go to the next slide. I'm going to continue identifying these ticks, but I think because they carry this pathogen that it's important it's done accurately. So what's done in medical entomology is a system called molecular barcoding, and it helps researchers identify the tick that a pathogen that this person is sick with. And basically that's just matching fragments of smaller DNAs to a larger genome and matching it up. So I'm going to modify this method and use this for identifying ticks because they're so difficult to key out. If you guys remember, go ahead and we're counting these tiny little bumps. And that's the only difference we have right now between the species. So comparing their DNA is a much more accurate way to do that, and it's used very successfully in medical entomology. Okay, the next one. I'm also going to refine my field collection method. So I do take ticks from people that collect them and find them on their tortoises. But I'm also interested in seeing if those ticks that are just hanging out in the burrows, not attached to tortoises, if there's any difference in the pathogen prevalence in those populations. So I mentioned the carbon dioxide traps, the dry ice traps, which don't really work that well. In theory, they do, but you have to constantly be out in the desert refilling the dry ice, so it's going into the burrow and getting the tick's attention. But what is done in some other entomology work is a leaf blower with the vacuum modification on it. And basically, you just add some tubing and you vacuum out a burrow, just like that. And then what's really cool about these ticks, so maybe you have like this bucket of dirt, you don't really have to sift through them because they will fluoresce under black light like scorpions. So that kind of makes it a lot easier to find them. So in order to determine if these tortoises do have that borreliacidal factor that kills Borrelia, I want to do an infection kinetic study, which is done non-invasively for the most part. The only thing invasive is a little blood sample from a tortoise. And if you haven't seen that done before, you actually go up under their carapace. It takes a few seconds, and it doesn't really seem to bother them that much other than the fact that you're pulling them out of their burrow. And then you take that blood sample and you put it in a petri dish, and in that same petri dish you introduce Borrelia spirochetes, and you just measure survivability, which is exactly what that scientist did that determined that blue belly lizards have that same enzyme. So you just use their blood, pretty non-invasive, and I do think that tortoises probably do have this enzyme in their blood, and if they do, I think that would be really a win-win for desert tortoise conservation, as well as helping us learn how to manage a potentially dangerous disease across the landscape. Okay. And then finally, tick distribution and pathogen distribution has not been measured, has not been determined at all in the Mojave. So I'm going to take the ticks that people send me that I collect in the desert and model their distribution and their pathogen distribution as well. As I mentioned, it has been attempted for Turricata, but pathogen prevalence was never involved, and neither was the pathogen prevalence in Ornithodorus hermsii either when that was attempted to be modeled. So with that, I'd like to thank my collaborators, my lab, the folks at the USGS, and at University of Nevada, Reno have helped me collect ticks and analyze them. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Right now, you've been finding soft body ticks. Are there any hard body ticks out there too?
Right, so are there any hard body ticks in the Mojave? No. No, these are the ticks that we'll find on desert tortoises. They're soft body ticks. Yeah. Yes.
I think looking at the inside, we do valley salamander and try to use that as isolated and make a drug out of it, treat mountain fever.
Okay, that is a great question. So she asked if the factor in the blood has been used for potential treatment. No, actually, in fact, very little is known about the mechanism that how it actually kills the spirochete is known, and I hope to continue my research and try and understand that better, especially since that study was done in the 90s, so we have a little bit more, better technology to analyze these kinds of things. Yeah.
So what do you do if you find a tick on your tortoise?
Great question. So if you find a tick on your tortoise, like your personal, your pet, remove the tick, and you can kill it. You could also send it to me if you want to know if it has Borrelia. But otherwise, just take it off and kill it. I would check the burrow because their life cycle is all in dark nesting-like areas like burrows. So if it continues to be a problem, you might want to tear open that burrow and just douse it with some pesticide and put the tortoise elsewhere for a minute. And you can bring it back in that same area after it's been opened up and a caricide has been applied.
You will not change.
So that's the million-dollar question, is that's why people have, non-invasively anyway, that's why people have started using these vacuums to suck things out, and also the dry ice. If you just want to check your burrow without tearing it apart, you could get a block of dry ice and just put that block in front or somewhere midway down so the CO2 gets into the burrow. And if you see ticks starting to crawl up, then you have ticks.
You want to make sure that
Or a black light, yes. I'm sorry?
you want to make sure your tortoise is out of the burrow when you're doing it.
Yeah, if you're putting a block of dry ice in there, yeah. And Sarah mentioned too, yeah. And Sarah mentioned too that I was talking to her earlier that you can also use a black light because they do glow under black light, that species of tick. So.
Should we be thinking about vacuuming out the burrows regularly?
I don't think so. I don't think that's necessary. If you have a problem, you should take care of it with the acaricide and opening up the burrow and like completely dousing it with pesticide. Oh, you can try that first, actually. But if you have a major problem and the tortoise keeps coming up with ticks again and again and again, then that's what I would do. Yeah.
What color do they glow with the black light?
I think it's a purplish. Yeah. Any other questions? Hey, great. Thank you guys so much for having me. I really enjoyed speaking today.
Thank you, Molly. Okay, everybody take a deep breath. All right, that was awesome information. Now, I want to let you guys know that this is something that came to our attention pretty much within the past couple of months. We have ticks at our habitat, and what we have done is we went crazy with it. We just tore up all of the burrows, put the pesticide down, and now we're in the process of putting the tortoises back. I don't want you guys to leave this room super worried. And the reason is that this is all brand new information, and I wanted to share this with you guys because this is what we're finding out as well. Right now, I don't have a specific protocol, but you guys are asking the proper questions. What do you do when you see a tick? My advice right now is if you find a tick, give us a call. I think for academic purposes, we want to collect as many ticks as possible. How many have we given you so far, Molly?
15, 20?
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously this helps with research, but if you get rid of your tick and you just take it off and kill it, that's cool. But give us a call, because if nothing else, we can share whatever information we have with you anyway, which we will do through emails and put it on our website and everything. But I don't want you guys to think that, oh my God, you can't stick your hand inside of your tortoise burrow, okay? Because this is, if you put it in perspective, I'm not going to say it's not important. It is important, but we just don't know. And I would caveat all of this by saying, I don't think any people have died from this in the Mojave. Yeah, there's black widows and all sorts of other stuff in burrows that you don't want to stick your hand in there anyway. So.
What I should say also is that really the danger isn't, as far as we know, doesn't really affect the tortoise. The tortoise will, it's annoying, but as far as we know, it's not harmful to the tortoise as far as just taking its blood. Just be more concerned about tick bite on you and be aware that if you've got a tick bite and you have a fever, you're probably using antibiotics.
Yes, what Molly said was if you have a tick bite and you have a fever, go see your doctor. Go get some antibiotics. That's at the very negative case. But in the event that you do see a tick, give us a call. I mean, I'm working on a protocol right now for specifically this, and tearing up your burrow. I get it. If you find a tick, you want to take care of this problem. So give us a call, because if it does entail tearing up your burrow, well, we got volunteers to help with that, and that's, as far as I'm concerned, that's equally as important or even more important than building new burrows. So this is something that we are looking at, and we just want to keep you guys updated and have all the information out there. So it's really cool work what you're doing, Molly. It's very, very important work. Thank you for the presentation. Okay, so Cher, is she still here? I think she left. Cher brought some spineless cactus. If anybody wants them, they're up here. Please grab them. And one of our board members, who's moving to Tucson, it sucks, Nadine, she left a whole bunch of these little tortoise things. So if you guys go ahead and come up here and grab one if you like. These are, you can just grab one. Anybody have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Last year there was a couple of hikes into Red Rock to identify where the wild tortoises were. Do we have any hikes coming up in May?
No hikes on that program. I know what you're talking about, but better than that, we are doing a project with Nevada Department of Wildlife in which we're walking in that pretty much same area of Red Rock, where it creates kind of a valley, and we're doing tortoise mapping out there. So if you want to get involved with that as a volunteer, get with Sarah, and then we're setting those programs up. It'll probably be in late May, somewhere around there. David, do you know anything? I know you work with, well, because you were down at the Jelly Roll project, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that was something different. Yeah, so we got stuff going on at Red Rock. It's pretty cool. You just basically arm to arm, you're walking straight through the desert, and you're looking for tortoise poop and tortoises. Any other questions? Yeah, and tracking them. Get a little telemetry device, the tortoises that are already tracked, and yeah, it's pretty cool stuff. Citizen science stuff. Any other questions? Cool. All right, have an awesome day. We got food in the back, and cool, awesome.